Hi, you're listening to Sergeant Dorsey Speaks podcast produced by the Get Global Network.
So, let's get to it. Last week was really a good week for a couple of reasons. First of all, to my LA family, we got a little bit of rain, right? Some much needed rain. And so I don't know about you guys, but whenever it rains, I turn into a 12-year-old. I lose my mind. I open up all my windows in my bedroom and I just hunker down and listen to the peaceful, calming, if you will, effect that the sound of rain has on me. So I get my best sleep when it's raining. So that was a good week. Also, last week, I participated in a film shoot that will be airing on the BET network during Black History Month. And I can't really say a whole lot more about it other than the segment has to deal with community relations and police departments around the nation, what's going on, what's going wrong, and what we can do better. And so look for that. And as we get a little bit closer, I may have the freedom and flexibility to at least give you the name of the project and maybe even some of those involved. But right now I'm sworn to secrecy. So look for end of February, beginning of March on the BET network, something involving police and Black community relations. Also, I'm sure by now everyone has heard that Amber Guyger, the white female police officer who allegedly entered the wrong apartment in Dallas back in September, I believe it was, shot and killed her neighbor, Bothem Jean, has been indicted on murder, not manslaughter, but murder. Now, I know folks were celebrating, at least I saw that going on my social media platforms. And so let me just remind you that this is just an indictment, you guys. And before you get all excited about, her being indicted, let's not lose sight of the fact that though we're getting more indictments of police officers, the conviction rate still remains, in my mind, to be minimal. Remember, Michael Schlager, 20 years for killing Walter Scott. Roy Oliver, 15 years for the murder of Jordan Edwards in Texas. Jason Van Dyke, most recently, was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in the shooting death of Laquan McDonald. And then, of course, the tragedy, the travesty of Peter Leong in New York, who was given probation for shooting and killing Akai Gurley. So, that's just four names of officers who've been convicted. So let's not get sidetracked with the Amber Guyger indictment. In the event that she's not convicted, and in the event that if she's convicted, she doesn't get a substantive penalty. So, we don't want to be too euphoric in this very meager indictment. This is step one, and there's much more to be done. So, it's going to be a long time down the road. It probably, for sure, it won't happen until maybe the end of next year, I'm thinking, with regards to the trial. And, folks count on us to have short-term memory, and I pray that this isn't true, but there may be, some other fatal police shootings between now and the time that this thing with Amber Guyger actually goes to trial and a jury has an opportunity to deliberate. So much work left to be done in regards to finding justice for real for Bothem Jean. Also significant in the news last week was the arrest of Erron Brown. Do you know that name? Erron Brown. Probably not. Erron Brown is the 20-year-old who was involved in the shooting at the River Chase Mall in Alabama on the night of Thanksgiving. I didn't see very much said about his arrest, and now I know based on articles that I read is that he was arrested in the early morning on Thanksgiving, somewhere around 9:30 in the morning. The day after Thanksgiving. Remember, the shooting happened Thanksgiving night in the mall. And Erron Brown, based on video that the officers were able to recover in the mall, was identified as the person who actually had been engaged in the fight and had shot at, I believe, the friend of Emantic Bradford, the 21-year-old who was ultimately shot and killed by police. Remember, Emantic was the good guy with the gun. Emantic was coming to the aid and defense of his friend who had been shot by Erron Brown. See, Erron Brown was the bad guy with the gun, and because those off-duty police officers didn't take the time to assess the situation and do a proper target identification, if you will, suspect identification, they shot and killed the wrong guy. They shot and killed the good guy with the gun. And, when I went on CNN and I talked about this, I generally know the kinds of things that are going to send the Twitter mites crazy when I say it. And I spoke with regards to, what it looks like and what happens when the good guy with the gun that the NRA likes to brag and boast about, we need more of. I spoke about what it looks like on CNN when the good guy with the gun happens to be a black man. What typically happens, well, at least what we're seeing happens. I don't want to say typically because that sounds like there's more to come, and my hope and prayer and belief is that we won't have any more incidents like this. But nonetheless, we've had two within a relatively short period of time. Jamil Roberson in Chicago, good guy with a gun, happened to be a black man, coming to the aid of patrons in a a nightclub of some sort, and police rushed in and saw the good guy with the gun, who happened to be black, shot and killed him. And then, of course, this situation was repeated on Thanksgiving night in River Chase Mall in the murder of Emantic Bradford Jr., good guy with the gun, who happened to be black. So that's probably why you didn't hear very much mentioned or made of the fact that Erron Brown had been arrested in the shooting, because understand, law enforcement there in Hoover, they've gone radio silent. They're not saying very much about this, and my guess is because right now they are trying to figure out if there's enough ink in town to put in the pen that they're going to use to write that check to the Bradford family. Hoover PD understands that they messed up in a real way, and they are going to have to atone for that mistake by way of civil settlement. So, I'm not talking about they're going to have to make any changes with regards to their police department or with regards to their shooting policy or with regards to their use of deadly force, because understand that never happens, or I should say that rarely happens. Don't want to say all, ever, and never, right? But they being police departments, don't have a problem. They being cities don't have a problem writing a check to the family. And the reason that they don't have a problem with that is because the money doesn't come out of police department coffers. It doesn't come out of that police officer who was off duty, who didn't take a moment to assess the situation and figure out what the heck he had before he started letting rounds go. Yeah, that officer is not going to have to pay for any of that. It's going to come from the taxpayers. And so, what I want to know is, taxpayers, have you guys had enough? Taxpayers, aren't you guys tired of giving millions of dollars to families who are victims of errant police officers and not having that police department or that police officer share in that financial pain? Let me know when you guys have had enough, taxpayers. In the meantime, if you want to know more and hear more about what I said with regards to the Emantic Bradford Jr. deadly police shooting, subscribe to my YouTube channel, Sergeant Dorsey Speaks, and subscribe to my podcasts, which you're listening to now on the platform of your choice, Sergeant Dorsey Speaks. In other law enforcement news, here in Los Angeles, the current LA County Sheriff Jim McDonnell, who is a former LAPD command staff officer, has conceded in his re-election bid just on last week to the challenger, who is an LA County Deputy Sheriff Lieutenant by the name of Alex Villanueva. Alex Villanueva is an insider, and he was elected to the position of LA County Sheriff over the incumbent, Jim McDonnell. So you know what that means, right? Right? According to the LA Times, listen, is about to go down in the LA County Sheriff's Department. According to the LA Times, numerous LA County Sheriff Department officials, including high-ranking executives, those at the level of chief and above, are going to be removed as soon as Lieutenant Alex Villanueva gets sworn in. And they're reporting in the LA Times that this includes the undersheriff. That means the person just below Alex Villanueva. He's bringing in a new undersheriff. The 4 assistant sheriffs get to go bye-bye. 8 chiefs, a communications director, a community outreach director, and the department's 2 constitutional policing advisors are all going to be replaced. A bloodletting. You know, that's the same kind of bloodletting that we had on the LAPD when Bernard Parks was promoted to police chief. You know, initially, Bernard Parks was believed to be the heir apparent. He was an LAPD insider, grew up on the department, obviously. An LAPD insider, and when Bernard Parks was finally given the nod, if you will, that was after LAPD hired Willie Williams as the first black police chief. So Bernard Parks comes in second as the next black police chief. And when he was sworn in, I had people telling me over there in Parker Center, and I think it's the 6th floor where the police chief's office was located at that time. They said that there was a bloodletting. That's how they described it. One of the first casualties was the then, I believe his rank was assistant chief, black guy by the name of Ron Banks. And what happened real briefly, little LAPD gossip, if you will, what happened real briefly is that Ron Banks joined the camp of Willie Williams when Willie Williams came in as the police chief. And so LAPD kind of divided right down the middle. You had the Willie Williams camp, you had the Bernard Parks camp. And so depending on, you know, whose team you were on had a lot to do with how you got treated when Bernard Parks became the police chief. And so I'm not going to go into a whole lot here about that, but I do talk a little bit about it in my autobiography. Visit my website, www.sgtsheryldorsey.com. Now let me say this, let me be clear and let me set the record straight, because while I'm mentioning Bernard Parks and the angst that a lot of folks have with him, I don't. I know that there are a lot of black police officers who don't have very nice things to say about Police Chief Bernard Parks because he was a little heavy-handed. It's rumored, or it's fact, I'm not sure which one, but certainly Bernard Parks is said to have fired more black police officers than any police chief in the history of the LAPD. Now, you know, is that because they were in the wrong camp? I don't know. But I don't have that angst with LAPD's former police chief Bernard Parks, and I want to set the record straight and have it accurately reflect that I had personally enjoyed a great relationship with Bernard Parks, and part and parcel of that is because I went to high school, Catholic Girls High School, with his daughters. Matter of fact, 3 of them, Felicia Parks, Lori Parks, and that name may be familiar to you. Lori Parks was actually my classmate. We were friends growing up in high school at St. Michael's, and Lori Parks was my classmate. She died of cancer when we were in the 10th grade. And the reason that name may be familiar to you is because the older sister, Felicia, had a daughter, and she named her daughter Lori Parks. And the granddaughter, Lori Parks, was tragically killed in a shooting in South Central Los Angeles on Crenshaw Mall. And it was kind of a big thing here locally in Los Angeles, understanding that she was the granddaughter of Police Chief Bernard Parks. My relationship was with the actual daughter, Lori Parks, and then Michelle Parks, who was a couple of years younger than me, also went to St. Michael's High School. And I was friends with with the girls. And so I didn't know Bernard Parks when we were in high school, didn't know anything about him or the LAPD, didn't want to be a police officer. But, sometimes the plans that we have are a lot different from what God has in mind for us. And so, again, I speak about those relationships, my very good relationship with then Police Chief Bernard Parks in Black and Blue, The Creation of a Social Advocate. Check it out. Now, I'm not mad at LA County Sheriff-elect Lieutenant Villanueva, and I'll tell you why. Because it makes sense to bring in your own team when you become the new police chief, police commissioner, sheriff, whatever it is. It makes sense. And listen, this is not unique to police work. Anytime you take over a situation, you want to make sure that you have a team, whether you're a CEO of a new company or head of a new department. You want to make sure that you have a team around you that supports you, working to make you look good as you take on the challenges that are going to be facing you, particularly when you are a police chief or a law enforcement official, if you will, whether it's a chief, commissioner, sheriff, from an outside agency. So when you come in from an outside agency to a new police department, much like Renee Hall did over there in Dallas, I wonder if some of the hiccups that she's having are because she didn't bring in a team, because she stepped into that position as police chief over there in Dallas without people who were surrounding her, who had a real vested interest in her success and in making her look good. And so I'm not mad at Lieutenant Villanueva for bringing in his own folks when he gets in there. But I'll tell you who is mad. A lot of LAPD folks, because McDonald came from LAPD. And so there are a lot of LAPD folks who are real butthurt, if I could just say that. I'm seeing a lot of chatter on social media about the fact that McDonald was not given a second term there over at the county sheriff's department. And so, LAPD folks who probably had a good relationship with McDonald, much like the relationship that I described with Bernard Parks. If that person treated you well and mentored you and supported you in your career, then quite naturally, you're going to have good things to say, and you're going to feel butthurt, if you will, when they're rejected by the sheriffs. And so understand that there's kind of like a rivalry between LAPD and LASO anyway, right? Kind of like USC and UCLA. We have that same kind of situation going on in law enforcement. And so, LAPD folks are saying McDonald is a good guy and a great leader, and he deserved a second term, and shame on the LA County folks. But now it's not the LA County sheriffs that didn't put him back in office. It's the LA County residents that didn't put McDonald back in office. But you understand what I'm saying. Yeah, he may be a good guy. McDonald may be a good guy. He may be a great leader. And a lot of times when you hear police officers talking like that, let me just go ahead and decipher that code talk for you. Generally, that means that, he backed the troops. And as a 20-year veteran patrol officer and patrol supervisor, as a ground pounder, that's what I am. I understand and I get what officers mean when they say, he's a good guy and a great leader, because it's important to patrol officers, particularly that you have a police chief who supports the troops, who supports the ground pounders. And so I'm sure that based on McDonald's career, should he so choose, he will land on his feet and will find a position with another police agency if he chooses to do so. Sometimes God closes doors because he's about to open another one. And sometimes, what we think is what we want and what we need may not necessarily be so. So having said all that, let me go back to my other mantra that I like to repeat over and over and over again, which relates to voting and police and law enforcement, right? And why voting is so important. And absolutely voting matters. And I'm going to give you an example of exactly what I'm talking about and what that looks like. I often talk about every police chief serves at the pleasure of a mayor. Well, right now in Baltimore, the mayor, the Honorable Catherine Pugh, has made some significant changes over there in her city with regards to the police commissioner. Now, over there in Baltimore, Mayor Pugh has been dealing with some really difficult issues. It's been reported that there is unprecedented violence going on over there in the city, and she has been endeavoring to regain the community's trust and to quiet some of the unrest that's going on over there in the community after the death of Freddie Gray, right? You remember the Freddie Gray incident a few years ago. Freddie Gray is a young black man who was detained by some police officers because he ran, thrown in the back of a police van, paddy wagon, if you will. And by the time he was transported to the police station some 4 or 5 miles later, suffered injuries, allegedly from a rough ride, which I didn't buy then and, I don't buy now. But nonetheless, that was the report that was given, and ultimately Freddie Gray died. So at that time, there was a police commissioner by the name of Anthony Batts. Also going on in Baltimore were a whole group of officers, and this was their gun trace task force. And so those officers were alleged to have been involved in some kind of a federal racketeering case. I mean, this was a whole task force of rogue officers that Mayor Pugh was dealing with. All of this is going on her watch, and it ultimately led to a consent decree. And now the city is being monitored by a federal judge to check on the kinds of progress with the reform that was necessarily needed over there in Baltimore. And so to that end, Baltimore Mayor Pugh has been trying to get it right, so it seems. And there have been 4 commissioners, 4 commissioners in the city of Baltimore this year. So let me tell you what that looks like. There's a lot of drama going on over there. So just follow me if you will. I'm going to talk slow. Daryl D'Souza, he was a 30-year veteran on the Baltimore Police Department and was then the police commissioner. Now, Daryl D'Souza was hired in January after Kevin Davis, who was the commissioner, was fired because of crime stats, and Kevin Davis wasn't getting the job done in regards to quality of life issues and reducing crime. So Daryl D'Souza, 30-year veteran, was then hired to replace Kevin Davis. Now in May, Daryl D'Souza had to step down amid accusations that he failed to file doggone tax returns. So Daryl D'Souza stepped down in May, and now he's scheduled to plead guilty to 3 counts of misdemeanor tax fraud on December the 18th. So with Daryl D'Souza on his way out, Baltimore needed a new police commissioner. So Baltimore City Mayor went on a campaign, if you will, in search of a new police commissioner there, and she found in that the person of Joel Fitzgerald. Now, Joel Fitzgerald is a Philadelphia native, and he had spent 17 years on the Philadelphia PD, mostly as a narcotics officer. But then he went on to be the police chief for several other municipalities. Most recently, Fitzgerald was the police chief over in Fort Worth. Now, while Fitzgerald was the police chief over in Fort Worth, it's reported that last year there was a survey done by the Police Officers Association, and of the people that were surveyed, 84% of the respondents said that morale had declined under Fitzgerald's tenure. Now, understand this, Fitzgerald is a black man. And the fact that the Police Officers Association, which my guess is predominantly white, I don't know that to be a fact, just saying, if it is, it would make sense why 84% of the respondents said morale was low under the tenure of Fitzgerald. That's what's reported in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. So, not surprising. But before he was the police chief over in Fort Worth, Fitzgerald did a lot of moving around. He was the police chief in Missouri City and also in Allentown. Now, something interesting happened while he was the police chief over in Allentown. Evidently, he has a son. Let me back up. before I get to the son, the issues that were facing Joel Fitzgerald over in Allentown had to do with a lot of police brutality complaints that plague that police department over there. Now, I'm not really sure what Joel Fitzgerald did to adjudicate those police brutality complaints, or if he lessened the police brutality complaints during his tenure, but there were a lot of them, so much so that the city was hit with at least 8 different lawsuits alleging police misconduct. And Joel Fitzgerald, while he was the police chief in Allentown, his own son was arrested and charged with pointing a loaded handgun at 2 undercover detectives. His son went to trial and was found not guilty. Okay? So I don't know what that was all about. But nonetheless, the son was found not guilty. And now the son, Joel Fitzgerald's son over in Allentown, has accused the officers of racially profiling him, something, of course, we can all relate to. And there is currently a lawsuit pending against, and this is wild, against the Allentown Police Department, or I don't know if it's another police department. It doesn't say in the article, but nonetheless, Joel Fitzgerald's son has filed a lawsuit against the police for racial profiling. So again, comply and complain, right? You hear me talk about that all the time. This young man was arrested and charged with pointing a handgun at 2 police detectives. Evidently, he complied with all of their orders, directives, whatever was going on in the midst of that detention, in the midst of his arrest. He was booked and all of that. And he lived, he survived the encounter, which is why I say comply and complain. And so his complaint portion of that is lawsuit. He's filed a lawsuit. So we'll see what happens with that lawsuit. I'm going to have to see if I can find out the son's name and track and monitor that racial profiling lawsuit that's going on over there in Allentown. But anyway, nonetheless, back to Joel Fitzgerald. So he's coming over to Baltimore. Well, he's already there. He's over at Baltimore now as their new police commissioner. And my hope would be that he, too, has a team that he is building around him, that he has either brought in some folks or has really done his due diligence with regards to those who are within close proximity, those who are there to support him in his endeavors to fix all those things that are important to Catherine Pugh over there in Baltimore. So we'll see what happens. Good luck, Joel Fitzgerald over there in Baltimore. Now it's time for Did You Know? You know, I often talk about not being alone and not being the only one who speaks the way that I do in terms of being a Black woman on a major metropolitan police department. And so I have a very dear friend by the name of Rochelle Bilal. Rochelle Bilal is a decades-long veteran of the Philadelphia Police Department. And Rochelle Bilal is now running for sheriff in Philadelphia. And she's having her very first fundraiser on December 13th. So I wanted to share with you and ask those of you there on the ground in Philadelphia to come out on December 13th between 6 and 9 p.m. at 4128 North Broad Street for the very first fundraiser for Rochelle Bilal for sheriff. Change is coming, Philadelphia, and it's coming in the name of Rochelle Bilal. So until next time, be good and be safe.
You have been listening to the Sergeant Dorsey Speaks podcast, produced by the Get Global Network. Please take time to subscribe to the podcast on podcast platforms like iTunes, TuneIn, Spotify, Google Podcast, Spreaker, Stitcher, and many other platforms. The podcast is also available on the Alexa and Sonos wireless speaker systems. Speaker systems.